But he says that there's something fundamental about the libraries. Look at the last paragraph on 532. He says, I hope if there's going to be cutbacks in budgets, it's not the libraries, and here's why. The reason is simple. In hard times, libraries are more important than ever. There it is. When things start going bad, libraries are important. Why? Read the next line. Human beings need what books can give them better than any other medium. Since those ancient nights around prehistoric campfires, we have needed myths and heroes and moral tales and, notice the repetitions here rhetorically, information about the world beyond the nearest mountains or oceans. Let's put it in our notes this way. Libraries provide us with the ability to dream, to use our imagination, because reading is the ticket to the imagination, he says. It's a beautiful way to say it. Of course, today, he says at the top of page 533, with books and movies more expensive than ever, and television entertainment in free fall to the lowest levels of stupidity, ouch. In other words, he says, much of what we are exposed to is like cotton candy. And while cotton candy may be good and fun to eat, you can't live off of cotton candy. It will begin to affect your body and your mind. Take a look at how he talks about it. He says, they are quite simply another kind of food. We imagine and then we live. What a great line. Let's write that one down. We imagine and then we live. How you use your imagination is the way you live. And if the only food you eat, and by the way, this is a classic word picture at 3A, let's make this observation already, from Francis Bacon's essay Of Studies. I've given a lecture already on this. You can find it at learnstrong.net. We read in the same way that we eat. And Francis Bacon will say in that essay, some books are to be barely tasted, some are to be chewed up, and a few are to be digested. He doesn't mean chew up your anthology physically, but what he does mean is good reading makes us think, and that is of itself a really important thing. Why? Because reading is a pleasure of travel. By the way, at 3A, another observation really quickly. You're going to study in your senior year a poem, a really famous poem by a poet named John Keats, on first looking into Chapman's Homer, where he talks about reading as like travel, going places in the mind, right? We then get to his second argument. Oh, by the way, on page 533, do you see that last sentence right before the heading called Immigrant's Appreciation? Do you see it? A child who starts with Harry Potter can find his or her way to Dumas and Arthur Conan Doyle, the great Sherlock Holmes stories, to Mark Twain, who we've already seen in this class and we will see again in our junior year, Walt Whitman, who we've already mentioned a couple of times, but we will read more fully in our junior year, and yes, to Tolstoy. You're going to read texts by Tolstoy in your sophomore year. Joyce, you're going to read a text by him in your senior year, and Proust, who we'll reference in your senior year, the great French writer. In other words, reading moves you, it grows you, it evolves you, and we begin with Dr. Seuss, right? The sun did not shine, it was too wet to play, so he sat in the house all that cold, cold, wet day. No question. I do not like green eggs and ham. I do not like them, Sam, I am. Of course, we start there, right, in Dr. Seuss, but then we evolve. But watch this. When we get older as readers, we can come back to green eggs and ham and go, oh, that's a poem. Yeah, it is a poem. That's a poem with intense rhythms. Yes, it is. It's a poem about learning to try things you don't like. I like them. I do. I like them, Sam, I am. And I will eat them on a boat, and I will eat them with the goat, blah, blah, blah. In other words, I was being taught from the time I was very young, you should try new things. Don't fall into ruts where I don't like that, I only like this. Not just the food you eat physically, but the food you eat intellectually. That is to say, at 3B already, we can ask this question. How do you feed yourself? Not physically. Not the nutrition you put in your mouth, but the more important, or equally as important, nutrition you put in your mind. What do you eat? Intellectually, how are you growing? And as a freshman, it's important to ask this question. If you're going to really begin to think about your future, it makes sense to become a reader so that you can begin to use that imagination. But there's another reason why libraries are important. Look on 533. He makes this comment. America is a land of immigrants. We came from some other place, most of us. And because we came from some other place, why do libraries matter? Because when you arrive as an immigrant in New York City, you have no money. How will you educate yourself and your children? You go to a library because it's free. That is an important idea. The freedom that is associated with being able to gain knowledge through libraries, right? In other words, the immigrants who come are able to build the new New York by virtue of using their imagination. And he points it out. The new immigrants are no different from the old immigrants. America is a land, he says it, from the Irish and the Jews and the Italians of my childhood, he says. And then look at the last paragraph. That process must go on in all the places where the poor now live. It's impossible for the city to do it. If it is impossible, then we must do it ourselves. So here we go. This is a key final idea. If there's no money available, let's go to work and help ourselves to build these libraries and keep them going. Of course, on page 533, you see him there. Look at the picture of him. One of the most important Americans to ever live, Andrew Carnegie, a Scottish immigrant who became enormously wealthy in the still business. In 1889, he published an essay entitled The Gospel of Wealth. In it, he argued that rich should use their money for the public good. Under his plan, the surplus wealth of the few will become, in the very best, the property of the many. Unlike many other wealthy men of his time, Carnegie acted on this belief. His many charitable acts included the building of more than 2,800 public libraries throughout the English-speaking world. He's mentioned again on page 534, right? Unbelievable, right? The wealth to create more than 1,600 public libraries, including the 65 in New York itself. An amazing thing. He says it finally. This would be a kind of voluntary tax. We could put it together. We could do this. On one level, he says, it would be a powerful pledge to maintain the life of the mind among all classes in the city. Let's put it this way. Democracy is built on libraries, because libraries are the exchange of ideas. Libraries are the soil where the seeds can be buried, right, of the great imagination. All right, let's jump to 2A quickly and go to work now with major messages themes. Well, the most obvious is libraries matter. But why reading matters? But why imagination matters? In other words, the next time you hear somebody say, I'm bored, recognize that what they're really saying is, I'm not using my imagination very well right now. Yes? Being bored is a choice that we make. Another observation at 2A. We got to sometimes, as a people, fix the problems that government cannot fix because government cannot fund. We have to prioritize. He says, we have to work together. In other words, we have to make sacrifices for the good of our children and those who are coming. Finally, number 3. Think of it this way. That library you walk into at Worland High School, that library you walk into anytime you walk into a community, that library was appropriated by those who came before. That library is a monument of history of the past, and it should be respected as such, right? Somebody wrote the books that are ending up in the library, but other people had to pay to put them there, and that means they're worth something to us. We need to consider that as well. Let's jump to 2B really quickly. The idea here, of course, is that we're looking at a persuasive essay. What is the persuasive thesis? Well, some of you will say the persuasive thesis is libraries are important. Others of you will see beneath that argument and say, whoa, the reason libraries are important is 2 reasons. 1, they're the place where people can read. 2, they're the place where those who don't have money can still be exposed to ideas. So an immigrant family that has nothing can take their children to the library, and there their children can be exposed to ideas and learn to dream a new America, a new world. And that, of course, is foundational to what it means to being an American, right? To dream. Of course, we have some powerful rhetoric and some powerful language here. You can go back through this. Notice that word picture of the notion of you are what you eat, and that's true physically, but it's also true intellectually as well, isn't it? At level 3A, I've already mentioned Keats's classic poem upon first looking into Chapman's Homer, the idea that reading is like travel. What is, of course, for you, the movie, the song that emphasizes the power of the imagination? It will be Albert Einstein, that great genius who said, imagination is more important than knowledge. Why? Because imagination is where our wisdom and our understanding comes from. Knowledge is what you know. Wisdom is what you use. Understanding is what you use. And of course, that's tied to your imagination, to your capacity to dream. Well, let's finish now at 3B. A couple of questions here for you. What is your view of reading? If there's anything I hope we've already begun to do in freshman English with you, it is to challenge you to have a different attitude towards reading. Not necessarily that you will say you like to read, but you like to use your imagination. Yes? That's one of the reasons why gamers will finally come around to reading. Because they love their imagination. That's why they love the game. So they begin to understand the power of reading. I once had a student with me who studied Most Dangerous Game and immediately said, you could put this into a video game and I could begin to block out how it would look. It could be awesome. In other words, notice from the reading, the use of the imagination, the creation of the game. See how that works? It's a beautiful way to think about how these two kinds of things can go together for you. What is your favorite book in the history of your life? What's the book that you can remember reading that moved you the most and made you think the most? Maybe it's not a book. Maybe it's an article. Maybe it's something that you read, right? What is the most important piece of reading? There's always been this famous question. If you had to be somewhere all by yourself, completely alone, and you could only take a piece of writing with you that you had to read or got to read, what would that be for you? Another question. If reading is not a pleasure for you, ask yourself why. Why is reading not a pleasure for you? Some of you will admit it's because I never actually learned how to do it very well. And it always made me feel kind of dumb when everybody else was a better reader than me. And so reading for me wasn't really about using my imagination, especially once I got into middle school and high school. Some of you will say, I like to read, but it's the stuff I like to read. And when I'm assigned things to read, it's no longer fun for me anymore, so I don't like doing it. I don't like being told what to do at all anyway. But I certainly don't like being told what to do with my imagination. I hope, though, that I've been able to show you in some of our studies of these texts, the texts that start out looking and sounding maybe kind of boring, once you begin to read at multiple levels, start to become challenging. And then all of a sudden, I'm using my imagination. In other words, as I grow up, I start to look at more sophisticated levels of food, intellectually speaking, the life of the mind. How do you feed the life of your mind so that you can grow? Well, there's some interesting questions. I hope that you've enjoyed this study, and I hope that you do become a reader. Thank you.